Pastor Ray, I'm assuming you're in charge of this tonight. This evening, in this special presentation, we will be reviewing the approved plans for a gymnasium and then an arts center here on the campus of the Lutheran College. And that project, or joint project, was approved 2 years ago. However, the funding of that project was coupled together. And I understand that the proposal coming from the Committee 2 will divide that funding going forward. Last time when we approved this, we were talking about a $20 million project. The estimates have changed in the last 2 years, fortunately for the better. And so we turned the floor over to Pastor Michael Rail of the trustees, and he will be explaining the situation once again to us so that we can ask questions, so that we have clearly in our minds what we're proposing or what is being proposed, so that tomorrow when Committee 2 comes, we're in a position to address the issue, having been thoroughly informed, and God willing, it will not be a lengthy discussion, but we can decide how we should best go forward. Pastor Rail, you are given the floor, and he asked me then to moderate or appoint people to, or not appoint people, but respond to people with questions and then direct those. So I'll stay here. Pastor Rail.
Moderating opening thought some of this is going to be reviewed from 2 years ago, but because it was 2 years ago and because there's lots of new faces here, I'm going to go over some of what we did last year just to kind of get you up to speed. You have blessed us with an incredible building committee. We have 2 architects along with all kinds of different other talent. Makes this job really easy. The other thing that was easy about this, and we're going to start with the new gymnasium separately first, is that this building more or less designed itself because of the parameters that we were given. So we were told 2 practice courts, and that's one of the things we'll talk about later. We'll talk about need. 2 practice courts in the height of the building. And those of you who have been here for a volleyball game, it can be real fun because they're playing it off the ceiling. And so we had a minimum height for the inside of the building. Parking had to be dramatically expanded. They wanted a separate entrance for ticketed people that were coming to the games, another entrance for students so that wouldn't get clogged up with that one. And then the parking, they wanted to level, everything had to be handicapped. They didn't want us to block any of the view sheds, so how do you put a 32-foot tall building on this campus so it doesn't block the views from all the other buildings? And the Long Range Planning Committee identified first a site in the hillside off here to the south. We didn't like it, so we kept moving this, and we finally settled on this area over here to the west of where we were before. And you'll notice if you look at Ross is the IT coordinator. I'm pushing the button he told me to. There we go. I'm pushing the wrong button. So if you look at this is the campus. It's an overview. You are right here, and you probably And what that does is it lowers that building, that footprint of that building in height, so that it becomes virtually the same height as the existing buildings here. We don't ruin any views from anywhere. And then it also worked out well because you can come down here, here's where the students would come in, here's where the ticketed people would come in, the buses and the players would go down here, bus drop off and then parking here, pick up and leave. One of the other mandates we have on the campus is as little as possible to have vehicle traffic intersect pedestrian traffic. So previous building committees have done a great job of their walking paths in here. We don't have any vehicles that intersect that other than Mark. His residence is back across that. He's very careful. So as much as we could, we wanted to do that. We envisioned that would come in here and we expanded this parking. This is the current maintenance building over here. We could have signage and arrows that come and park here, and that would, as much as possible, keep that vehicle traffic from intersecting the pedestrian traffic into the building. And of course, here, the buses would have to come through here, but they would unload, load, park down here. So there's going to be 2 levels to this building. The upper, we're calling the mezzanine level. That's this level here. This is that entrance that we talked about for the ticketed people, people that had to buy a ticket. This would be the student entrance. And again, that's here and here. And here's a view of what this would look like from a floor plan perspective. Ticketed people will come in here. They told us that they aren't really going to a separate booth or anything for tickets. Most gymnasiums are building or just having a table there for ticket sales. That's what we would do. What we wanted to do also is keep the foot traffic off of the gym. And to do that, we did a couple of different things to make sure that that would happen as much as possible. So when people would come in here, we would have signage to the concession area here, so they'd know where that is. They come in here, they'd see the bathrooms off to their right when they're walking through, they'd know where that is. That's, by the way, a view of what that entrance would look like. That's the student entrance. So they would come in that door, they would walk down this aisle here. Again, they would see the bathrooms. They would come into the bleachers here, here, and here. This is shown retracted when they're expanded, when they're ready for seating for a game. They would come in on the top, and they would already know where the bathrooms are and the concessions are, so they would exit also off the top. There would be no need for them to go across the gym floor at any point. If you've ever been in the poor athletic director's office, you know he needs an office. We also had room for a conference room so he could meet with people. The AD has to have meetings with other athletic people. Yeah, that's a technical term. And this is just an idea to give you a cutaway of what it would look like. And again, the hometown bleachers we believe would be expanded like this. The other would be expanded here. But coming here, and this is where anybody know who Uncle Rico is? Yeah, can you put me in with one state? All right, we got those guys. And they would stand along this railing right here. And if Coach Rail, Coach Felder, and Coach Williams would have put me in with the one state. So that's the Uncle Rico railing right there. This is actually enough seating for the entire student body at these tables. If they needed to, the COVID thing, you remember, we needed room. So the concession stand is here, there's tables here where they can eat, and then they can still see, if they get up to this railing here, they can still see the court better. That was the upper, we call it the mezzanine level. Here's the lower or gym level. It's a cutaway of what it will look like. Let me go back here first. So they would go in this door, and again, the bus comes around, drops them off. They come in this door. Officials' changing room and showers are here. We don't have that now. Locker rooms would be here, and then they could enter that venue would be for graduation. We could not use, however we repurpose this, it wouldn't be big enough for graduation. So graduation we envision being held here, so this would store the chairs or whatever they needed for that. This is how we envision the building looking from the ground level. This is that lower level. Buses would come and drop off here. That's the entrance where players, coaches, officials would enter. View of the same, just from a different angle, from the southeast. Back a little bit, you can see the Commons building here, present gymnasium there. Again, just to give you a visual of how it sits in there, how it would be oriented. We'll come back to, you can have questions on any of this when we're done. I just want to show you where we're at. Chapel Fine Arts Building, the other part was, since if we built that, what are we going to do with this? And I'll just go through briefly a history. So again, you're here, we built this, what are we going to do with this? So the first thing we did is, well, very simply, let's just configure that with seating and storage on the sides for the chairs or tables or whatever we needed. Stage area here, the locker rooms would become changing rooms and so on. They asked us to give a concept of what it might look like, so we started with a very low-level idea of what it would be, a very simple, cost-effective way that we could make this usable. So you'll see some of the different iterations that we worked through, what it could look like. And here's part of the problem that we had. You still have that back of the building look. It looks like the back end of a barn. And this is what everybody that comes onto the campus, drives down to the lower campus, will see. And then we started looking at what's actually here. And it wasn't good. I'm not sure the life expectancy of this building. We're trying to remember when it was built. 69?
69.
How old were you? So 54 years? I don't think this was ever envisioned to be a 60-year building, but so then we thought, well, what if we make it look better? If we don't try to reuse the steel siding, what if we revamp it more? So this is what our architect came up with at the time. It would be basically the same thing inside. We would make this look a little nicer. Of course, the goals would be gone. Kind of what it looked like. Here's the thing that, if nothing else, killed it for us. To make this look like a real roof with a real pitch, they would have to have parapet walls, which are like Westerns. They're not real walls, they're just pretend walls. And you can see those, that's near the bottom of the hill. You would be able to see those all the way down. It's like, what are those? So we moved on from there. Again, this is where we're at, and we thought, well, what if we built a standalone for a lot less money than it would take to do something with this, just raise this, and built a standalone. So we first started with, and some of you may remember, a chapel up in this corner. You come on the school entrance here, academic centers here, you would see this building. And so it was a very basic configuration. We thought, well, this won't cost much. We were appalled at what it cost. This is kind of a history of what we went through to make it look like something presentable. And we thought, well, what if we upgrade it a little bit and turn it? You see how we turned it to the corner to make it a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. And then we changed some of it. It has to be Georgian Revival because it had to blend with that middle campus, which is Ingram Hall, the academic center, a Georgian Revival style of architecture. Did I get that right, Lynette? There it is. And then we went through some changes to make it a little bit more chapel-like. And then we started looking at it. So the roof of the current gym lacks long-range viability. The building lacks adequate HVAC. Virtually 100% of the exterior siding needs to be replaced. The square and cubic footage exceeds our needs. The current configuration is undesirable. That's this way. The current orientation is undesirable. The exterior doors need to be replaced. Insulation is inadequate. The wall construction is not conducive to renovation or upgrade. In other words, we can't put those nice walls on these footings. We'd have to tear it all out, put new footings in. Foundation cannot support an improved exterior wall system. Other than that, it was perfect. So we went in a new direction still. Let's see about tearing all that down and on that footprint build a chapel. And you'll just see the history of what we went through. Still kind of the back of the building look when you come on campus. That's what it would look like. And then the creative people on our committee said, hey, why do we have to have it facing that way, the way it is here? What if we turn the building? We'll go back one. If you've ever been at a function here, if you are lucky enough to get a seat back here, you need those opera glasses to see here. So we wanted to reduce that back seat or near back view line from there to the stage. We didn't need all that room anyway. So that's, well, let's turn it. And you can see the sight line has greatly reduced the distance here. Well, let's make it better. Let's curve the seating. And then we'll add a slope. And this is the configuration that we settled on. It is a slope floor, so the view lines, unless you're like me and you have somebody normal height in front of you, you'll be able to see the stage pretty well, and it's close enough. And obviously this would host chapel and the musical and theater, things like that. The bathrooms we would put here directly across the hall from the existing bathrooms. It would double the bathrooms, which is one of the things they told us they needed. The storage area for stage props and things like that was increased. The stage area was dramatically increased. And they love this with this little Heidi walk here that you can get behind the stage if you needed to, as well as restrooms for men's and women's rooms. So this is just a very basic line drawing of what it would look like inside. The thing that we liked about this most is this is the view from the east. So this is what you would see coming down the hill from the academic center, and it looks like an entrance. This is what you would see coming down the hill that the public would most see, and it looks like an entrance. So we got away from that back of the barn look. These we would work on. It looks like they're landing on Utah Beach. That ain't a good look. We would do something with those windows. So what we liked about this, again, is that there are entrances on both the east and the west for the students and anyone coming from the outside. Additional parking you can see in front. We greatly expanded the parking. Developments in the biennium. The design concept, as Moderator Nolting mentioned, for both the gymnasium and the Fine Arts Building were approved by the 2022 convention. So this design was already approved by the convention. We don't need to do anything with that. To develop a more accurate cost estimate for the 2024 convention, this one, the ILC Building Committee authorized our architect to proceed with 50% design development plans, which would allow our general contractor to secure preliminary bids and a low-level cost estimate, which was completed in September of 23. Now, I don't pretend that I understand all that.
what that means is Market and Johnson, we asked them, how much will this cost? We want to come to this convention with an estimate that's realistic. They said, when are you going to start? We said, well, we don't know because we don't know how much it'll cost. So to get out of that circle, Market and Johnson, our contractor, very graciously, they haven't charged us a thing, and their folder on us is over 6 inches thick now. The work they put in on this is phenomenal, with the hope that they would get this work for pay someday. So they said, look, if you would get your architect to design, develop to 50%, which means 100% design development plans are what the architect gives to the builder. 50% allowed them to send them out to the contractors and get low-level, semi-realistic bids. So they're in the ballpark at least. So we went ahead and spent that money, which we'd have to do anyway with our architect. Mark and Johnson said, we'll take that, we'll give you an estimate based on that. Again, low level, we haven't value engineered that. We haven't gotten into the fine nitty-gritty of that, so it's a ballpark number. Number 3, in April of 2024, the building committee began an investigation into what FEMA grant money might be available if we were to design part of the new gym to serve as an approved storm shelter. So I want to go into that a little bit. This was in April during our coordinating council meetings. Prof. Schoenbeck and I went to a gathering at our architects, and the president of Market and Johnson said, did you guys ever look into a FEMA grant? No. Did you ever tell us to? No. So they said, you should. And we said, you should. And they said, we will. So they did. What that is it's part of, government has acronyms, Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, or BRIC program, B-R-I-C. The BRIC program is one of the few federal projects, according to the guys that are working with us, that actually saves the government money. They build infrastructure that doesn't get demolished in a tornado or some natural disaster and then have to be rebuilt. So they're actually saving money by putting money into these buildings to make them storm-proof. So I thought, okay, we'll look into it. The grant process is complex, that is an understatement, and would require retaining a professional grant writer. At-risk expense of the project would be $17,000. So his fee structure is, we would retain him for $17,000. That is, if we get the grant or not, that's what we risk. The rest of his income would come from the grant. It's a part of the grant that pays that grant writer to do his work, which is $80-something thousand for this. So our risk to the building project is $17,000. Preliminary estimate of possible FEMA grant dollars is $1.8 million. Net dollars to the project, given additional costs associated, in other words, there would be storm-proof windows or storm shutters. They have a system that unlocks the doors when the emergency sirens go out. It's pretty cool. So if the emergency sirens are activated, the doors automatically on that building unlock so people can get into the building without a key fob. Market and Johnson would have to charge us some more because they can't self-perform some work, but so we're talking a net to the project of about $1.3 million. That's just a ballpark. It may be more, it may be less, and that's a preliminary estimate. And they got to that 1.8 million this way. The LCBC has been able to find no government entanglements, first of all, or encumbrances connected to the grant. Now, if you're like me, the first thing you thought was government. There are several projects in the state and in the area. The grant writer has written several successful grants each year, and we are looking hard at that. We have not found anything. The two things we found is you have to maintain the building. We would probably do that. And you have to allow people to come in when there's an emergency. We would probably do that. We have not found any other encumbrances. Now, we're still looking at that, but we thought since the convention is now, we need to bring this before the convention so that you can weigh in. Maybe you have experience on that or some other concerns, you can voice them. The grant mandates only that the shelter be maintained and made available. 3, the shelter would serve not only the faculty, staff, and student body, but all residences within 1/4 mile walking distance and half-mile driving. So here's what that looks like. Here's the ball diamonds, here's the campus, you're about here. So what the grant writer did is he looked at who could get here within 1/4 mile walking or a half-mile driving. And those of you familiar with the area, here's where you come onto the campus. Grover Road, this is called Cordon West. It's directly to the north of Prof Row, and then some of Cordon Park. Prof Nauman's residence is right about here. So that's the area that would be included according to FEMA's guidelines. So we would have non-CLC members whose lives we could save in case of an emergency. We didn't think that's a bad thing, but you may disagree. This is our proposal for convention action. Approve the recommendation by the ILC Facilities Expansion Program Committee that the gymnasium and fine arts projects be separated and that we move forward with the gymnasium project. 2, consider approval of an increase in the approved CEF loan total, which is currently $3 million. And this is really not, this is just information, but here's the current status from a funding perspective. We don't have this money in hand, but this is a possibility, another way to look at where we're at. So we have $1.5 million, a little over, in the building fund. $3 million has been guaranteed, or that's written in and approved for CEF loan. And then if we are approved for the FEMA grant, we would have in hand $5.8 million in funding for an estimated $10 million gym project. That would mean $4.2 million in additional contributions would allow us to begin construction. Now, part of why I bring that up is we were told anecdotally, you know, I'd like to contribute to this, but I'm not sure it's ever going to get built. And what we want to do is try to break that cycle of, well, we got $1.5 million and we were approved for a $3 million loan, so we don't think of this as an if, but a when. Now, the last thing that someone asked me to address is this a need or is this a want? And maybe second only to good. That's a hard word to define. Because, well, I think we agreed the AC was a need, but we were still instructing kids on this campus. They were cramped, they were hot in the summer months. But it worked. They made it work. Northwest, there was pink insulation stuck on the outside, but it worked. Is that a need? Well, we determined that was a need. So what about this? Is this adequate? Can we do it here? Yeah, but we believe it's in the same shape as that was in the level of, as to the level of need. I was here for one game this year. It was just a regular game during the season, boys basketball game. This place was absolutely full, and there were people standing in all the doorways. Now, some of them were Uncle Rico's, but there were people standing in the doorways. And that wasn't a special game, it was just a normal basketball game. So, is it a need? Could they get by? They have been. But I don't think our founding fathers ever intended this to be the end-all gym. They didn't build it like that. You don't build a pole shed to last forever, which is essentially what this is. It's pole shed construction. So is it a need? Again, depends on how you look at need. Is it something that would greatly enhance the school here? Is it something integral to every single high school? Yeah, you can't have a high school without a gym. And then you get into the scheduling problems, and you hear that some of the teams, I don't even know how many teams you have here now, but some of them were practicing after study hall, 9:30 at night. Yeah, I mean, is that a need? We could run them at 11, I guess. 12, well, we don't need anything, we're doing fine. I remember way back when, practicing here, and the organist to be playing, and we'd be shouting soft pedal, soft pedal. We didn't know what it meant, but it would. And then you got to fit the musical practice and the play practice in here. And then there's choir rehearsal. And I guess we could have somebody from ILC, President Schoenbeck is on the committee. He could speak to that if he wanted to, as to the scheduling problems, the crowding problems, and then icing on the cake. If we did increase the seating size to what the new gym would accommodate, then we could hold tournament games for conference tournament games, even pay games if our team isn't in the tournament. So you tell me what a need is. You'd have to determine that for yourself. And I remember when we were at the point of pulling the trigger for the academic center, which was also interesting because if you remember, those of you who have been here, you remember when we started to build the commons, I will never forget when they said the price tag was going to be $1 million. And there was just an audible intake of breath, $1 million. That was our first $1 million building. And we paid for it 8 years? Something like that, way ahead of schedule. And then the academic center. Well, let's add the Ingram renovation, and let's throw on North Hall renovation. And that was over $3 million. And we paid that off, 13 to 20, 21, somewhere in there. It's astounding. So I will never forget sitting in that when we're at the point of kind of trying to determine, and Prof. Gordon Radke was sitting in on that meeting, and he wasn't saying a thing. And those of you who know Prof. Radke, I said, Prof. Radke, you haven't said anything. I'd like to hear from you. And he said, oh, it's easy. Is it a need? The Lord will provide. So you have to determine, is this a need? Probably time for questions, more than time for questions.
Okay, any questions? Please go to the podium. Paul?
Yeah, so I have a question about the FEMA grant. Do you guys have a grant writer?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, cool.
We haven't paid him his retainer yet. He's working for free right now. We're going to try to stretch that out as long as we can.
Okay, cool. And then my last question for now is, with number 1 up there, you're proposing separating the gymnasium and the fine arts. I see a need for both of them. So why are you guys wanting to separate them? And well, one of the consequences of separating it is possibly the first project will get done and then the second project won't get done. How does the Board of Trustees ensure the second project will get done too?
I'm building project. I'm not Board of Trustees.
Oh,
I want to make
building
that clear that
project.
I'm not speaking for the trustees, all of whom I'm sure are in favor of this.
Sorry, I mean the building project.
Steve, are you here? Steve Siddle? I'm going to put you on the spot. Steve works for Wisconsin Department of Transportation. And we were told by Steve and another one, you never group projects together because you'll get nothing done. You pick a project, finish it, and then start the next one. So that's as good an answer as I can give.
Mr. Schmidt?
You mentioned how this place basically has a expiration date that we may or may not have passed already. So the way I understand it is we either pay $10 million for a new facility or we pay $10 million in constant maintenance to pole barn gym of Theseus, this place.
Not quite that bad, but I like the way you think.
Teacher Schrader.
Just curious, number 2 suggests an increase to the current CEF loan of $3 million. Do you have a figure that you're looking to request from convention this year?
10 million. No, I don't. We'd have to, and I assume that committee is working on that, working on the interest rate. I think what the last convention said was $3 million, 2.5, 30 years. Just to give you a point of reference, I think the monthly payment on that was $10,000. I'd have to look. Pardon? 12,000? And that's based on the fact that we had an $8,000 mortgage on the academic center in 2013. That was our monthly payment. We not only did not ever fail to make that payment, we accumulated money in that fund, and routinely the trustees would make advance payments on that. So given that history in inflation and so forth, we want the committee, the convention, to consider whether or not we can carry something over that amount.
Professor Rail.
2 questions. First one, you talked about value engineering. Maybe you could explain that a little bit more and possibly what might be saved if that's possible. The other thing, what was the seating capacity in the Fine Arts Center? I might have missed that. Was it
280, I think. I'll get you that slide and you can count.
Pastor Tiefel.
Value engineering first. That shed you have in the back, not value engineering. Value engineering is we take what Market & Johnson gives us for estimates. They'll divide it into what they call work divisions. So concrete, finishing, just different components of the building project. What we do then, we did on the academic center, we'll take that line by line and say, what can we self-perform? What can we do less expensively? Can you take this and would this work instead? And we go through that with a fine-tooth comb. I think, if I remember right, the academic center, through volunteer labor, we saved, I think it was close to $120,000. After we value engineered, we self-performed the landscaping, the finishing. Guys ran all the cat wire in the thing. How many miles were there? 7 miles of cat wire in the AC. We did whatever we could legally do, and we had volunteers to do, which was quite a bit. Now, some of this, obviously, no one's going to lift up a 5-ton precast wall. But we'll go through this and say, can we self-perform this, this, this? So that's why it's a very low-level estimate. We wanted to bring a number to you guys, and we're confident we could get this thing done for $10 million, hopefully less.
Pastor Tiefel.
Yeah, that part about separating the projects, and so they never tell you to do 2 at the same time. That memo wasn't given to the group, to the synod, when we did the gym and Rhyme Hall at the same time.
Say again. I hope you forgot it, but say it again.
You just want to hear me talk, right?
No, I didn't hear you.
This doesn't count against Mark. Mark Kranz is not counting against my time, is he?
Put the mic up. There.
We did the gym and Rhyme Hall at the same time, talking about separating projects.
Okay.
Pastor Siebert.
So I had 2 questions. The first is, we're separating them out. We're doing the 2 separately. The Fine Arts Chapel Center, I see it only has accommodation for 280. Can that be, is that subject to expansion in the future if that is the second project?
Not really. We'd have to go into the hillside, and it would be cost prohibitive.
Okay.
Plus, the seating configuration is sloped the way it is and angled in. I suppose you could keep going to about 4 seats in the front, but then you're going to have that long view line again.
Okay. The second question is, with the FEMA grant, would that open up the building to being a place of public accommodation? That was a concern regarding the whole issue of the homosexual marriage issue. So I was just wondering, would the FEMA grant open then the new building up to that public accommodation issue?
I want to say no, but that would be a 95% answer, so we'll make sure of that. But pretty much no. Only open to the public in case the sirens go off. No one has a right to go in the building other than them. That's what makes it different than a public accommodation.
You have the floor.
This is a follow-up question on the FEMA grant. Considering the definition of emergency, is that a well-defined emergency? In other words, it boils down to what I'm really asking is, what about a health emergency, like what we had for COVID? Would we be subject to government?
Yes, it's triggered to the sirens. If the sirens don't go off, it's not an emergency. That's our understanding.
Considering what the possibilities might be for that emergency, I'm just a little bit worried about the federal government and the way that they act. For this relatively small amount of the 1.3 million, if you could look at the definition a little bit closer and have an alternative source for that, it might be well worth experimenting or investigating alternative sources to replace that FEMA grant.
Appreciate that. We're early into it, and we intend to do a lot more investigation to make sure of questions like that.
Okay.
Appreciate you bringing
A lot of things can happen with the federal government as far as regulating quote-unquote emergencies.
Really?
Yeah.
Mr. Gerbitz.
Thank you. I recall from another presentation that there was more to the size constraints of the Fine Arts Center, including possibly, was it sprinklers or some other?
Wow, you got a good memory, John.
Some other regulatory situation where you go into a different cost tier if you go over that size.
You're exactly right. I forgot about that.
Okay, thank you.
If we expand that at all over the number that we have, we would have to, it would be exponentially more expensive because we'd have to fire suppress it. There's other constrictions or restrictions that would kick in. Thanks for reminding me.
Teacher Schrader.
To what extent does the preliminary quote as given include furnishing the gym in terms of amenities like gym floors, bleachers, all the rest of it? And in terms of the additional, I'm not sure what it costs in terms of money, but it seems just a lot of labor, moving our existing fields out. How much of that is wrapped up into that 10 million figure?
Gym floor, yes. Bleachers, yes. Exercise equipment, no. There's some add-ons in there that I didn't include in that figure. Moving, no. Other furnishings, no.
Okay.
Like conference table, we would envision like the AD would take a desk from there and move it in there.
Thank you.
Mr. Whitgriff.
Who is a trustee who is in favor?
In regards to separating the projects, one can't be done without the other one because we need this space to be able to build here. So something has got, because you're going to continue to run the school, you can't build here and build there at the same time. So that was just a comment about space. A question I have is in regards to the impact to the general fund. We talked about the payment, but what about additional insurance costs, utilities costs, things like that? I would assume you'd save quite a bit in utilities by not having this type of structure. But just a general question about the impact to the general fund.
It is a concern. I mean, it's not a nothing. We can't quantify it right now.
Missionary Nauman.
The last time Messiah Eau Claire had a building expansion, it was to expand the school. And we started with a yeoman's building committee and gave them the list of desired parameters, and they fulfilled it. They found everything that we wanted to do at the school, and they brought back a self-standing $4 million project, and the voters said, that's a bridge too far. Let's make a big improvement and do some things well that we can actually do in a reasonable amount of time. And since the beginning, since I've heard about the $10 million project, I've been thinking bridge too far for this group, bridge too far. Is there even any initial fallback position of what we could do to dramatically improve the situation but not fulfill the design parameters that this building envisions?
That's probably a long-range planning, facilities expansion, whatever that thing is. That's probably a question for them, because we were given specific parameters on what the new building had to be. And we actually did quite a bit of work with our architect early on to try to remove as much square footage, because if you've been involved in building projects, you know getting rid of square footage is the key. The problem is this is a two-level building, so you can take out this storeroom down here, but there's the coach's room above it or the AD room above it. We could not reduce this anymore, and our architect spent quite a bit of time trying to shrink this as much as possible. So the next question is, could we use lesser materials? And Paul Heinze just shudders when we talk about something that requires a lot of maintenance. And then there's also the efficiency of the building. So the committee asked me, is this a Cadillac and we could drive a Chevy? Not really, because the nature of this building is such that you have to build it so that it's mostly maintenance-free, or to a large extent, it's energy efficient, and it has to house these activities. So there really wasn't any viable alternative that we could identify where we could dramatically cut this purchase price and make this a building that would satisfy our needs. Maybe we failed.
Professor Gullerud?
I realize this is outside of your charge and parameters, but did your committee ever consider a building similar to this, which would be essentially combining those two projects into one building, so you'd have a gymnasium, theater all together?
No, that's the short answer. The other answer is it would have to be at a different location, and then we would have, for example, down there, I'm not sure we could even build a pole shed type building of 2 levels. And then we have an access and exit problem, because it's still going to have to be a tall building. That's probably why we didn't look into it.
Mr. Lillo?
Apologies if I missed this, but so the gym location would be where the current softball field is, right?
Pretty much.
Do we have a plan for a softball field?
Yonder. It would be
by the tennis courts, basically. You have to clear
it would
trees
be
and stuff.
relocated to the east of, like, the slab, the tennis,
the
volleyball
tennis thing, whatever. Yeah. Okay. So a lot of trees to clear and that mess to deal with. Okay.
Any further questions? Pastor Duman?
Pastor Rail, about a third of the way through your presentation, I think I was glad to see you did have a initial proposal, I think, for looking at sites up near the entrance before you get to the academic center. I think we started this whole project a few years ago. That was the feeling of some that after 60 years, it would be nice to have if we're going to have a standalone chapel, and that'd be an ideal place, the first thing you see when you come in on campus. I don't think, though, you got back to, you did say quickly that the cost thing, I don't know if you got far enough or didn't mention that, or if that never got that far in the planning. Is what that would be as opposed to down here with a separate building, you know, and that was the reason that never went any further? Or do you know anything? Do we have to get this one built first before we know more about that? I guess that's kind of my question there with that.
Jeff, do you remember, I think it was, we thought if we could build that and save enough to just sort of get this usable, then it might be cost effective to just build that and then kind of piece this together. That was never had anything to do with the gym project, but 1.2 million? Was it even more than that? More than that? So we stopped looking at it then. That can be built anytime. It would require the demolition of Birch Hall, by the way. Pastor Duman, this is, or not Pastor Duman, who asked about the BJ, yeah. Here would be the location. The softball diamond would get moved over to this area.
Pastor Nauman?
I serve on Committee 2 that's reporting tomorrow. I can't find my chairman, but I'm a little worried about you asking us to, I'm sure I read it already, but you want us to up to 3 million, but who should we find out what that should be up to from? From whom should we find that out?
Is there a committee working on that?
Okay.
I can give you some.
He's waving at me, which means I know all about this, Jim, and you don't know anything. So sit down. Thank you.
I get that a lot.
President Schierenbeck?
Just to clarify from...
Can I tell him your idea first?
Well, I was a little bit scared when he said President Schierenbeck. It may have given some people who have been here a while a little PTSD. So...
He wanted to get you all whipped up and have me run in like some life coach.
I think it would have done well, yeah. From the Facilities Expansion Committee, one of the things we did look at overall usage in all the buildings, and going through that, we did find, of course, athletic usage, ILC usage, but also academic usage with PE classes and so forth. As well as, you know, grade school tournament and some of these other things. So we did look at all the different hours of usage in all the buildings and what it totaled up to. So we did have those figures. And then I think just to clarify, I think the thing that was driving probably the size of the building was the 2 basketball courts side by side, which of course is meant to alleviate that practice scheduling issue. So I think if you change the size of the footprint that way, then you lose that advantage as far as practice scheduling.
Any further questions?
Somebody asked if I could explain. The comment was made where, we can't add $50,000 here, but you're asking for $10 million there. So this is a trustee issue. The way our funds are set up in the Synod, historically, the Mission Board said, for example, there are people that want to contribute to these one-time projects, and it was all overseas at the time. I want to contribute money to put a roof on this building wherever. Is there a place I can contribute? No. You can give to the general fund, and the Mission Board gets part of that. So what we did is we established a fund, the Mission Development Fund. The money goes into that fund for one-time expenses, building projects, one-time purchases, nothing that recurs, nothing that will be year after year. That all has to come out of their budget, and they do a very good job, the Mission Board does, of regulating that. So if it's an ongoing expense, it's in their annual budget. If it's a one-time expense, it comes out of this fund, but they know how much money's in there, so they only spend what they receive into that fund. Same with ILC, they have their operating budget, and they have IIF, Annual Improvement Fund. So they have a list of things they want to get done, but only what comes into that fund can they use to fund that project. The building fund doesn't take money out of anything but the building fund. It isn't subsidized by the general fund. It is its own fund. So only what goes into that fund can be used to pay for this building. So to answer the question, they are two different things. We're not saying, let's increase the budget by $10 million or whatever annually. We're saying authorize this building program, and then the offerings come in and we make payments out of that. That's the difference. So in other words, it will never affect the general fund other than, so those of you who remember Phil Radical's maxim, no matter how many pockets you sew on, you only have one pair of pants. So there is something of a correlation between if you have too many funds, the general fund tends to suffer. So there is that consideration, but no direct correlation between what we spend on this building and what comes out of the general fund.
Further questions, comments? Committee 2 will be working on this matter and then presenting issues to us tomorrow. Pastor Konsenbach, not Bach, Bach.
Bach.
Not Baum.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
not Baum, no.
Sound like
In college, one of the profs called me Konzenberger, but that wasn't
Well,
right either.
Hey, I've been called Pastor Nothing, and you can always use that. It offended me, but perhaps it's accurate.
This is going to sound negative. I don't mean it to be negative, but you are giving us a very positive presentation. And there's nothing wrong with that. But like when we go to the polls, you know, you have two opposite candidates, and the one stands for this, and the other says, why, that's not good. And what if somebody were to bring, say, I'll call it a minority report, and which I don't think we're going to hear tonight or probably tomorrow. But what would be the opposite side of your report? And you can hardly answer that. But that's what I'm thinking as I'm sitting there. Okay, give me the alternative. What's the alternative to say, no, we got all kinds of reasons why we shouldn't do this. Well, what are some of them? That's what I'm looking for, so you can weigh the two rather than just hear a side, a good side. But that's what I'm looking for. Is there somebody tomorrow, today, that's going to say, this isn't a good idea and here's why? Thank you.
Do you want to respond?
No.
Teacher Schrader.
Nor is it my objective to respond. You were explaining how the budgeting was going to work and how it wouldn't affect the general fund. Just to elaborate, or just to educate me a bit more on the pricing structure, how this would work out. In terms of a loan, is it the understanding that the only loan we would take would be out of the CEF, or would we have any private loans to help fund this? Because I imagine essentially, are we pulling together that $10 million figure effectively in cash as a synod, even if the improvement fund is paying a loan back to the CEF? Are we pulling that as a cash as a synod and giving it as one lump sum, paying that off, and then just working with internal loans? Or are there any external loans planned for this?
It does have the advantage that we're paying ourselves the interest. But no, we would not have another loan from any other source. The CEF would not allow that. You'd have to suborn that loan. Somehow somebody would get paid first, and couldn't imagine anybody that would loan us money, nor would we look for it. We would solicit loans. The trustees would send out word that we need $3 million in loans. Last time that happened, I think it took a week and a half, especially in this climate. We don't know what it would be, but there are a lot of people that want to invest. Our foot has been ever harder on the brake, the trustees' foot, because we didn't need the money for building projects. The CEF is in very good shape now, and we didn't need the money, so we asked if possible, we don't want to renew. We will renew if you want, but we'd rather not, and we're not writing any new loans. We would remove that restriction. We would accept new loans to get that $3 million, or whatever we needed, probably about $2 million.
Professor Udi.
I am probably not the person to present the opposite, but nobody else stood up. I think the opposite was briefly referred to by Isaac, in that we do nothing. And we put up with the repairs needed here. As Mike indicated, I don't know how long the roof is going to last. It needs work. The siding, you can all see when you walk by it. You know, they've painted it a few times, but you can see it's in bad shape. For chapel, the heating system is horrible. Comes on during chapel, and you know, suddenly you can't hear the speaker even with the microphone. In a rainstorm, it's even worse. We could probably go on. So, is there a need? You know, like Pastor Rail said, that's a relative question. But yeah, we're making do here. We would have to continue making do here.
You have the floor.
Yeah, just a quick question on the Fine Arts Center. So at a capacity of 280, so comment/question. So if we have a student body of 100 kids, and we have an event in the Fine Arts Center, and each kid has 2 parents, or guests, we'll say parents, grandparents, whatever, we're already out of space in the Fine Arts Center. So is the attendance to events, I don't generally come up for the musical and plays, you haven't been to graduation since mine, but I mean, isn't that a risk that if we grow the student body of over 100 kids, then this $5 million Fine Arts Center is already past max capacity?
That'd be a great problem, first of all, but we have been monitoring, and the largest event here is the musical. And we've been taking an attendance of that musical, and because there's 2 performances, we feel the faculty could instruct the students as to which performance. One is much more poorly attended than the other, and if they had to go to 3, they could. That's the largest group that would be in that building. Everything else, if it outgrew that, would be in the gymnasium, like graduation.
Okay.
Pastor Pfeiffer.
Well, I'm thinking of a comparison to when I take my car into the mechanic, but I do trust you more than the mechanics I take my car into. But when I do, you know, depending on where I take it, they'll give you a list of stuff. You need this, this, and this. And kind of the bottom line for me is usually, well, is it safe to drive? And so I'm thinking back to when I was in high school here, when they had some kind of wrought iron bars in the heating system here that were over time starting to fall out of there. And I remember one coming down once and putting a dent in the floor.
I love you, man. That's it. This thing may fall at any time.
Well, that's why we're here to pray. And so my question along Prof. Udy's line was, you know, at what point, I'll make one more comparison. Our school right now in West Columbia is considering a project to completely gut and strip the school down to the studs and rebuild it. And the reason for that is we have this old asbestos issue in the walls and the wood from when it was built. And currently we're grandfathered in, and I don't want anybody to think, well, don't send your kids to West Columbia, but it's safe. It gets tested and it's safe. The air is safe. But there are certain things that could go wrong, like the plumbing, in which if that kind of a renovation needs to happen, then all sorts of things happen with the code and renovating it, and the cost skyrockets. So it's, do we do it now, or do we wait till something breaks and then we do it? And that's it'd be an expensive project. What is the point at which something goes wrong here where it is a safety, or just, you know, it's a safety issue, and if we don't have this project in place or started at least, is that then what? Is there currently a safety issue in the building?
No.
Where? Okay.
No.
And then when would that be? I gotta get my car fixed.
If you look at the construction of this building, the frame is what holds the thing up, and it's steel and it's in great shape. The roof is not going to fall in, much as I would like to pretend it might. But I'd have to look at, there's an IAF list, and I forget if it was 40-something or 60-something that they have budgeted for a roof replacement here, $1,000. Jeff is looking it up. So there are considerable costs, and that's just a have to. If you walk around and look at the siding, and if you look at the doors and how you can see out when you close them on some of them, yeah. That's an exterior door. That's a bleacher picture. So David, you're still driving that vehicle. So is there a hazard here, a safety hazard? By no means. But somebody asked about, well, utilities and insurance, that's an added cost. Maintaining this building is going to be very expensive, not to mention the inefficiency of it to heat it. I don't know if any of you have been back in the locker rooms lately.
These aren't staged. This was during the course of the school year.
That's the AD office, that last one.
Underneath the stage is where we store the charts. You have to climb underneath
Mr. Kraft.
I'm not going to voice my opinion on this because I might be shot by one of our missionaries, but I do have a question. Has the comparison, I remember the $1 million scare with the Commons and the $4 million for the academic center. Has a study been done, inflation adjusted dollars, kind of given a comparison of what, and it's not an apples to apples comparison because the gym is probably a lot bigger than either of the other projects, but my sense is that it looks like a big number, but thanks to inflation, that's not a valuable comparison to use old dollars in comparison to current ones.
I think you're right. It's a little higher than normal because inflation has been higher than normal, but if you go from 2012, which is essentially I think that's when we started the bid process, so we're 12 years later, adjusted for inflation, we're talking about a similar project cost-wise. Pretty close.
I just looked at my watch. It is 10 after 8. We had set this up for an hour. I don't want to end discussion, but I do believe that if there are committee chairmen who want their committees to be at work, they should have an opportunity to state that, and then we can continue. Are there any committee chairmen that would like their committees at this point to be freed to go to their meetings?
Floor is done. Doctrine is done.
Doctrine is done? Okay. Mr. Gerbitz?
I would like to meet with Committee 6 on membership and constitution in room 123 of the Academic Center now.
Okay.
Then.
All righty, and if you would please, you are scheduled to be on tap on Sunday morning, but if you can have things ready tomorrow afternoon, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, I will.
Okay. Any other chairmen that want to make anything? Yes.
Committee 2 would like to resume our work.
Okay, Committee 2, please, you two can resume your work. Just a comment in connection with what Professor Udy said and Pastor Konzenbaum. The response would be, no, Katzenbach.
Burger.
Okay. When you're 69, it's bedtime at this point. What would the alternative is this, is that 2 years ago we tied these two projects together and we said you can begin when you have the necessary funds. And so the proposal is to divide the project so that you're taking the issue in 2 bites rather than 1. And so if nothing is done, we simply go with what was passed 2 years ago. Yes, Pastor Wheaton, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'd kind of like to help Pastor Katzenbach answer his question, because Pastor Rail here is an excellent salesman. He could sell ice to the Eskimos if he wanted to. The 2 things that I think would be on the negative is some people see the price and then the sentimental value that this building has to some people. And I don't want to get too sentimental about this building because it's not really about the building. But this, what? No, I don't want it. No, we've already had some other person get sentimental about a building. But I look at it this way. This building is the same age as I am. Are you guys going to put me out to pasture? Pastor Anuti is shaking his head yes. Okay. Nice knowing you.
Looks like your foundation's getting a little shaky.
Are there any other comments or questions? Yes, Teacher Schrader.
Towards the opposition case, just as a potential alternative that I think is kicking around in a lot of folks' minds in terms of looking for an alternative. In terms of salvaging this building, I think it would be a challenge, and it may be nearing the end of its life. Although I secretly suspect that once the gym is complete, this thing will kick on for another 20 years, serving our theater community just fine. But part of what I believe Professor Joel Gullard was getting at with asking whether a similar design to this could have been built down there was whether a 2-court gymnasium that would also just have a theater, regardless of whether it's pole barn. I mean, it sounded like pole barn was probably not the way to build it, but whether a multi-purpose facility that was a gymnasium and a theater, and maybe that isn't 2 stories. Maybe that keeps our competitive volleyball advantage low ceiling, and doesn't need to host WIAA sectionals, and doesn't need a weight room, and doesn't need a seating area for cafeteria, and several other things. I think that's the Cadillac-Chevy comparison you were speaking to earlier. I think some folks would be interested in that. Maybe it's not a Chevy, maybe it's a busted down Kia, or a really small thing, but smart car version, I don't know. But to what extent can that be pared back and get it built at maybe 6 million or 7 million instead of 10? Because the difference in those 2 numbers is the AC, and an Ingram remodel and some North Hall renovations, which is not insignificant when it comes to our campus.
If I remember right, I think we ran that by Market and Johnson and our architect. Is there a way we could really get this down below? And their answer was no. So we didn't pursue it any further.
You have the floor.
Alan Durham with Corpus Christi Resurrection. Do you happen to know the categories of the 2 buildings?
I'm sorry?
Do you know the building categories? The reason I ask is that there's a lot of questions about combining the 2 buildings into a single category. The categories drive your building codes. Your building codes drive your expenses. If you combine the 2 buildings, you're probably multiplying your expenses. Your sprinkler system is a prime example. Anything over 300 people, you have to put in the sprinkler system. So you keep it under 300. If you combine the categories of the buildings together, conceivably, I don't know this, but I'm guessing that through the building codes, you're now applying that building code to a gymnasium, which is a different category. So when you come up with these great ideas, you should probably study the building codes with the building jurisdictions for this area, because that's what's driving these, like, separation of the buildings instead of the smart idea, the common sense idea that everybody seems to come up with. It's probably not going to work. But I don't know those answers. I don't know your building codes here or the categories of the buildings that your architect is applying to get past the jurisdictions for your permits.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Alan. I don't think, we never approached that with them, so we never dealt with it. They never spoke to that, our architect didn't, but that doesn't mean it wasn't real. We just never encountered it because we never said, can we combine these two?
Okay. Well, I know I'm getting way in the weeds on this, but it kind of opens up some of the issues that folks in the room are trying to address, and we just don't have that information. But there's a lot going on here with the architect that people don't realize. And those are just small items that I've run into in the last couple of years in my second career that I've been doing now. So you have to be real careful with the categories and the international building codes, and these jurisdictions in this country are now quickly adopting all the new energy building codes, like going from 2018 to 2021 like that, and huge changes, freon changes, the heating and the HVAC system that are completely different from a 2018 to the 2021 building codes. That's what the architect's doing for you. He's not going to explain all that to you because it's way down in the weeds, but you might be running into those kinds of issues when you talk to your architect about, okay, we'd like an art center and we'd like a gym, and then people say, well, why can't you combine them both into one building? You may not be able to and keep your budget down. It might be cheaper to keep them separate. I also agree with the fact that you keep the projects separate because it's cleaner for the architect and the builder and you. That's just my advice on that, but because we run into the same problem. We had one project that was a warehouse project with 3 buildings, and the permit jurisdiction made us cut it into 3 different permits. So you may be looking at that, where if you had 2 separate projects with 2 different permits, you're going to want to separate that, just for your own headaches, basically. Thank you.
Teacher Schmidt.
Just real quick, I think somebody had mentioned inflation between the last major project and now. I tossed in $1967 to today. $1 million back in 1967 is about $10 million today. So I don't know how much this whole thing costs, but just for comparison, $10 million would have probably done something like this back then.
Any further comments or questions? I want to thank everyone for coming then. Thank our Pastor Rail for the presentation and Professor Rail for his technical help. And thank all of you for being patient. And we pray that the Lord will guide the